Welcome to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast, where you can learn and be inspired by real-world examples of how technology is transforming businesses and reshaping industries in a language everyone can understand. Here is your host, Neil C. Hughes.
Welcome back to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast. Now, as many of you know, before I was a tech writer and podcaster, I did spend 20 years in IT, earning my stripes. And let me tell you, that stuff never leaves you. And I still have IT blood running through these veins today, even though I'm sat here talking into a microphone. And I do have many friends in the tech and event space that have been through an incredibly difficult time over the last 12 months. And we have seen a lot of big changes. And for IT departments, 2 years to deliver a project is no longer acceptable. Can't believe it was acceptable for so long. And businesses of all sizes are all facing the same challenges now. They need to improve customer experience. They need to build new functionality quicker and bolster competitive advantage. Not 18 months from now. They need to do it right now. But what does that change look like? So today I have invited MACH Alliance President, Mr. Kelly Goach, onto the podcast to discuss how the pandemic has forced IT leaders and those in the C-suite to rethink their IT architecture. And launched in June of last year, the MACH Alliance, which stands for Microservices-based, API-first, cloud-native, SaaS and Headless, is ultimately a group of tech leaders advocating for a new, open and best-of-breed enterprise technology ecosystem. So buckle up and hold on tight so I can beam your ears all the way to Wisconsin in the US so we can speak with Kelly about all of this and much more. So a massive warm welcome to the show, Kelly. Can you tell the listeners a little about who you are and what you do?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I do a lot of different things. My formal day job is a chief product officer at Commerce Tools. We're a very rapidly growing commerce platform. And my side job is co-founder and president of the MACH Alliance, which is a consortium of 29 vendors and counting, all advocating for MACH principles, which is microservices, APIs, cloud, and headless.
And like you say, you do a lot of things. I'm curious, though. A question I've got to ask is, can you remember where your love for technology came from? Is there a moment or a story there?
You know, it was actually my uncle. You know, I live in Wisconsin. That's where I grew up. And my uncle lived in New York City. And he had a job as a sysadmin in a big bank. And I remember as a kid, I'd go to New York a lot and visit them. And he'd take me into the office and we'd do these Solaris patches in the middle of the night. And I always thought how awesome it was to get car service and spend all night watching him work. And then we'd go get some Chinese food or something. And, you know, that was kind of what started it for me, having that experience. And this was back in the early 90s, mid 90s. So different world back then where you could just walk into a bank and take a kid with you. But it was a lot of fun.
Man, what a great story. I love hearing stories like that. And I think I speak to so many people that have successful tech careers, but I'm always interested in what planted that initial passion there. But modern technology has evolved and enabled new ways for us all to think about and do business. But can you tell me more about how these latest trends are inspiring MACH Alliance, and also tell the listeners about the kind of problems that you're solving for your customers over there?
Sure. Well, I can start at Commerce Tools because that's where the journey begins. We're a very different style of commerce platform. We are basically a big library of 300 individually consumable REST APIs. And we built our commerce platform in the same way that Google or Microsoft or Amazon would have built their commerce platform. So we built our commerce platform the same way that these vendors would have built theirs. And we're up against all these legacy incumbents out there from Salesforce and Oracle and IBM before they divested their commerce platform and all these others. And our primary differentiator in the market was our architecture, the fact that you could consume us headless. Right? That was a pretty novel thing. The fact that you could just use a handful of our APIs, the fact that we were multi-tenant. Those are all very big differentiators for us. And it was really difficult for us because we had all these marketing campaigns talking about how we were MACH based. That was a term we came up with. And our competitors would all say the same things, and clearly they were not being very truthful, right? You can't take a platform from 1994 and snap your fingers and make it microservices-based and natively headless. I mean, REST APIs were only invented in 2000. So by that very definition, you can't be API first if you predate APIs by 6 years or so. And we started using the term MACH internally, and it really caught on. Partners started using it. Everybody started using it. And we ended up getting together with some of our partners. It's Ampliance, which is also UK-based, Content Stack, and Vaultec, EPAM. And we each chipped in some money and we co-founded this alliance. And it's grown like crazy since then. It's been pretty remarkable how fast we've been growing.
It really is. And you've experienced so many big changes in the tech industry. And I'm curious, do you think the pandemic has forced the IT leaders, and especially those in the C-suite, to start rethinking their IT architecture? Is that the kind of thing that you've seen there?
Oh, dramatically.
Yeah.
And, the beginning stages of the pandemic, you really saw which retailers were tech-enabled and which ones were not. Because those that were, like Best Buy, for example, or Walmart, they very, very quickly pivoted their entire business to buy online, curbside pickup. And they turned their stores into distribution centers. And they had all sorts of approaches there for shopping, where you could get a scheduled slot and go shopping, for example. And they had all sorts of very flexible pickup and fulfillment and delivery options. And there are still some retailers to this day who don't offer curbside pickup. And it's simply a matter of the fact that their enterprise IT is so slow and boring and doesn't ever change. And I mean, it's backwards. There's so many organizations out there that are still just backwards. But I think COVID really accelerated digital transformation, and also really showcased who had their act together going into this. And as a result, they were able to really survive and thrive out there. So it's good to see that technology is having such a clear impact on business results.
It really does, and there has been so many changes. And it was like Google said a few years ago. I think there's no words more damaging to any business than, but we've always done it this way. So,
Yes,
I think everyone's kind of caught up with that now. But do you think having an IT architecture that can pivot quickly and seamlessly as a business needs change, do you think that is really critical now?
Oh, now more than ever.
Yeah.
I used to work with customers who would release to production once a quarter. There was one customer, they would release to production once a year, and that was an all hands on deck. Everybody come in, everybody cross your fingers that this all works, because the systems were all so closely knitted together that if you deployed one, you had to deploy all of them. And I think the days of that are just past us. I don't know what the number is today, but in 2015, Amazon.com released to production 50 million times, which is an average of once every second.
Wow.
And if you look at traditional retailers, even to this day, many of them are still only releasing to production once or twice a month. So there's a really big competitive differentiator if you're one of those digitally native companies that can very quickly release to production. Because I'm a big fan of iteration, and I'm a big believer that innovation derives directly from iteration. So to innovate, you have to iterate, basically.
I completely agree with you. And we are at a time now where more and more businesses are having to do more with less. And a lot of people will say that things like a recession are a huge catalyst for innovation. And a lot of people are going to be re-exploring some of those relationships. And a question I'm going to ask for all the IT leaders and decision makers that are listening to the podcast today is, when and how do you cut ties with a long-term platform partner, despite having spent millions on them over the years? And also, when does it make sense to stick with an incumbent commerce platform when there are cheaper and slicker platforms out there?
All software has a lifespan, and knowing when a particular product has hit the end of its lifespan it's a good thing to know that. And it's not necessarily a sign that the relationship has failed or the product has failed. But I think, like many things in life, at a certain point, whether it's a car or a piece of enterprise software, it hits a lifespan, right? Like you can only drive a car so long, and you can only run a platform for so long. And I think what you do is you incrementally look to ways to move off of that platform. And what we see a lot of customers do is they'll have a legacy platform from the 90s, and they will peel off pieces of that platform and start to use us incrementally. So maybe they'll use our product APIs, and they'll start serving the product detail pages from us. And then they'll kind of chip away at that monolith. It's actually called the Strangler pattern by Martin Fowler. And I hate that term. It sounds so it sounds so morbid. But the goal is to strangle the monolith until it just disappears and goes away. And that's how most of our customers end up adopting us. Is over time, as almost like a proof of concept, they'll start using a couple of our APIs, and then next week they'll use a couple more, and they'll kind of chip away at it until that monolith is gone.
And I'm curious, does the rise of microservice, API-driven, cloud, headless ecosystems, do you think that means now that it makes sense to ditch what you have and go 100% Mac? Or how will a business know when they reach that moment?
I'm a super pragmatic guy. Yeah. If what you have is working for you, and by working for you, I mean you can release to production very quickly. Everything is working fine. I would say stick with it. There's no use in adopting new technology just for the sake of adopting new technology. I mean, unless it's the new iPhone or something more on the consumer side, right? Because then that's fun. But for businesses, look, if you're a smaller business, if you're doing 25 or 50 or 100 million a year online, you probably shouldn't be using a big enterprise platform like us. Our customers are using more than $1 billion in revenue. That's typically what they're doing on our platform. So if you're using BigCommerce, for example, which is a MACH Alliance vendor, and you're at that lower end of the market, go for it. It's a great platform, and many organizations want that style of platform. But where we are and where we compete is a little upmarket, and we're after more of the customers who are looking for discrete APIs to consume, more a la carte.
And one of the reasons I invited you on the podcast today was after recently reading your new report. And in that report, it stated that 81% of global IT decision makers plan to add MACH elements to their architecture in the next 12 months. So can you tell me more about those findings and who you surveyed in that report?
Sure. We surveyed business executives and managers from across the retail and brands and manufacturing industries. And they were VP or higher, and most of our respondents were C-level executives, typically CIOs, CTOs, CDOs. And we were actually really surprised to hear that MACH adoption was as high as 81%. That's way above our expectations. But when we talked to some of these respondents, they actually said, look, this all makes perfect sense. This is where the industry's been going towards for a long time. I mean, microservices, people have been doing that now for a few years. APIs, I think we're very, very firmly in the age of API everything. And if you look at the success of companies like Twilio and Stripe, they've really pioneered that more in the financial services space. But in the content space, we have MACH Alliance vendors like Amplience and Content Stack and Contentful. They're all API based. So I think a lot of organizations are really API based, and that orientation is only increasing. And then cloud has been with us for a while. I saw earlier this week, Andy Jassy, the new CEO of Amazon, tweeted that S3, which is the very first cloud service ever, is 15 years old as of, I think, Monday of this week, which is pretty remarkable. So we see cloud really exploding across the enterprise, and you don't really see a lot of on-prem anymore. It's definitely all cloud first. And then finally, H for headless. We're now in an era where you have lots of different smartphones and lots of different apps, and you have websites. You have IoT devices, you have kiosks, you have point of sale systems. You have all of these new touch points where before it was really just the web. And when you have just the web, it makes sense to use an all-in-one platform that only serves the web. But now that we're post that as an era, it makes a lot more sense to go headless, offer up the data and the functionality through APIs, and then build whatever head, whether it's a website or mobile app, independently of the back end.
And I understand it was quite an in-depth report, but for people that haven't seen it yet, I'll probably download it after listening to this podcast. What were the big takeaways from your point of view?
The big takeaway for me is that MACH is here and it's in the mainstream now. When we started the Alliance, if you look at technology, the tech adoption bell curve, right? Technology is adopted according to a bell curve. We were still in the early majority stage last year. And now what's interesting is I think we're very clearly towards the top of that bell curve where normal organizations, big, boring, legacy enterprises that have done things the same way for a long time are saying, you know what, now it's finally time. We have to get off the sidelines. This is here. This is normal. And there are real costs to being stuck on some old legacy stuff that you just can't get out of. And a lot of those products are also hitting their end of life. So they have a very compelling reason to get off those platforms.
I'm curious, though, was there anything in that report that surprised you? Because you do have the ear of a lot of big businesses around the world. So was there anything in there that did surprise you?
I think it surprised me that there were still a number of organizations that are not looking in this direction at all.
Yeah.
And, we surveyed, it was a pretty broad representation. So that was good, right? We had a very good broad sample. But I can't, and it'd be good to do some focus groups with these folks, but figure out what CIO doesn't want to use cloud today? What CIO doesn't want to use an API? These concepts have been out there. These products are all, widely used. What would incentivize you to have a big data center on premises and deploy all sorts of software on-prem and then deal with upgrades? And it just doesn't make sense. That's what SaaS is for, right? It's better, faster, cheaper. Why would you not do that?
I've got to ask, what is next for MACH Alliance? I appreciate you probably can't share too much, but what is your big focus this year and beyond?
Our big focus is to continue to grow as an organization. So I think we're at 29 members now. We add somebody new all the time, which is amazing. But we'd like to get to maybe 50-ish by the end of this year. And I think based on our current growth rate, we could get there. And what's nice about that is then we're truly speaking as an industry. Initially, when we started, it was just 5 of us. It kind of felt like, a few of us off to the side trying to make some noise. But, already at 29, it seems like that's a pretty healthy number. A number of those are even publicly traded companies. And we're getting to the point where, once we have 50, then it truly is us as an industry and everyone else off to the side, So I think just continuing to be a voice out there for this new style, continuing to get together as a group and advocate for more of these principles. I think those are all very good goals for us as we continue to educate the market on what MACH means and what the benefit of it is.
And for anyone listening that would like to dive into that report, take a look and look at the great work that you're doing and even contact your team, what's the best starting point to do that?
MACHalliance.org or info@machalliance.org works as well. But we'd love to hear from you. We have different positions open. We have ambassadorships, and those are typically VPs of architecture, head of e-commerce type people from out there across the industry. So we have a good number of those folks. We have advisory board seats. So we do have an advisory board of industry luminaries to make sure that the Alliance is on the up and up and, to give us some good governance and management as an organization. So, you could feel free to apply there. If you're an SI or ISV offering MACH-related products or services, we'd love to have you join the Alliance as a member and do things through the Alliance that way. And finally, we constantly do webinars. We do hackathons. We do all sorts of different networking events. We're really building a community here of like-minded individuals, and we'd love to have you participate.
Well, a huge thank you for joining me on the podcast today. We will have a huge mix, really, of people listening all over the world that are IT leaders, decision makers, and indeed techies. And no matter what size of business they're working in, I think they're all united, no matter where they are in the world, with that all these challenges that we're all sharing at the moment, such as needing to improve the customer experience, build new functionality quicker, bolster competitive advantage. The days of those IT projects taking 2 years to put in are hopefully gone forever. So thank you so much for taking the time to come on here and share that with me today.
Well, thanks for having me. Very much appreciated.
The pandemic has been forcing businesses to not only digitize, but to do so in a smart way. Those who weren't technologically ready to respond to an unprecedented shift and adapt their business accordingly are now struggling. And in some unfortunate cases, businesses have completely folded. Having an IT architecture that can pivot quickly and seamlessly as a business needs and the needs of their consumers change is critical right now. So a big thank you to Kelly for tackling some of those big issues at the moment that every business leader is challenged with, such as when and how do you cut ties with a long-term platform partner despite having spent millions on them over a number of years, and when it makes sense to stick with the incumbent platform when there are cheaper or slicker platforms out there. And of course, finally, the rise of MACH, microservice API-driven cloud headless ecosystems, and what that means for businesses too. So many big takeaways in today's conversation, so I urge anyone listening to download that report, and I will put a copy of it, and I will include a link over on my website, techblogwriter.co.uk/Mac, where you'll find all the details of today's conversation and a few links to find out more information. But you've heard me talk today, you've heard Kelly offer his insights, but now I want to hear yours. Wherever you're listening in the world, no matter what the size of your business, you've been through 12 incredibly difficult months, but now you're faced with improving customer experiences, building functionality quicker, bolstering competitive advantage, and how you're going to do it with that shrinking budget. Whatever it is, whatever insights you've got, whatever experiences you've been through, please, I want to share them on this podcast. And there are a number of ways that you can do that. You can email me, techblogwriter@outlook.com. If you'd like to send me an audio question or audio message that we can feature on a future episode, open up LinkedIn, Instagram or Twitter. Connect with me at Neil C. Hughes. Hold down the audio button and away you go. And finally, remember, all of the 1,550 interviews we've recorded so far are available over on my website, techblogwriter.co.uk. But that's it. We've reached the end of another episode. So all that's left for me to say is a genuine thank you for tuning into this podcast. I know you have a lot of choice out there. Thanks for sticking around. It means the world to me. And remember, this is your show too, so keep your messages coming in. But I'll return bright and early tomorrow. But until next time, don't be a stranger.
Thank you for listening to the Tech Talks Daily Podcast with Neil C. Hughes. Remember, technology works best when it brings people together.